Hello there, and welcome to the CP7 Podcast. My name's Palm.
And I'm Andy.
And together, we are Chrono Passion 7. Hello, and welcome to your favourite watch-related podcast. Today, we've got a guest who's a bit of a mystery man. We all know him, but do we really know much about him? You might know him from Scottish Watches. You might know him as head of RedBar London. You might know him as the COO of Horage Watches. And possibly you might know him as a GPHG Academy member. We've got none other than Dave Sharp on our show. Welcome, Dave. How are you?
I'm very good. Apparently I have to say that I feel very welcome to be here. Is that right? Is that what I have to say?
Yeah, the tenor's in the post. Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. A tenor? If you only told me it was a tenor, I wouldn't have said it. No. It's absolutely great to be here. Thanks, guys.
Warm welcome, Dave, from my side as well. And as always, to kick off the show, that burning question, we need to know what's on your wrist today.
Well, actually, technically, at this time in the evening, nothing's on my wrist because I am one of these people that I wear a watch all the time, but I absolutely despise wearing a watch when I'm sitting at a desk at a keyboard because I hate clacking things off the desk. It absolutely drives me insane. So I have, though, had my, have to be on brand, of course. I have my Horage Omnium 37 on, which is the last release that we put out just before the back end of 2024. That one went out in 3 colours and 3 case materials. It was also the first watch we did in platinum. We've never done something in platinum before, so that was our first. But I have to say, a little bit off-brand. The thing I have been wearing for the last couple of days is something that I've been waiting for. It's not the most expensive watch in the world, but it's pretty funky. And this is the Nipro Solar from Bamford, which is the little crazy driver-style watch that he announced, I think, 3-4 months ago now, and they got delayed quite a few times for a few reasons, but it's a funky little driver with a blue LED. I didn't really know so much about this product, but it's a brand called Nipro, and they started, I think, back in 74, 75, round about there, and they were making these kind of LED driver-style watches. They even made one that was based on the Jaguar XJR, if I've got that right, which was that kind of supercar, hypercar from 1975-76. They did one based on it. And they kind of petered out into obscurity, I guess, over the years. And they've kind of reinvigorated the brand. And George Bamford wanted to do a little collab with them, and he announced this one. It's a solar-powered watch as well. So there's the screen on the front, and there's a little solar panel on the top of it. So you've got the screen on the front. Obviously, this is an audio podcast, so none of you'll see what I'm doing on the camera, but yeah, you've got the screen there and you've got the little solar panel at the top. Funky little watch. I think they're about £700, give or take, something like that. So again, not stupidly insane. Okay, not pocket money, but at the same time, not too hard to think about.
Yeah, awesome.
Very nice.
Awesome piece. Gives me Cybertruck vibes, actually, the style of it.
How dare you?
Sorry. Yeah, I love.
He's a big fan of the Cybertruck. Yeah, and if you want to see that watch and all the watches we talk about today, check out the show notes at our website, which is www.chronopassion7.com.
Pam, what's on your wrist? Any surprises?
I am wearing my new watch, which is the Omega Speedmaster, first Omega in space, not the new one, the original one. Well, not the one from the 60s, but the reissue. It's on a black sailcloth strap, and that's what I've got on my wrist.
So, Andy, what are you wearing today?
Yeah, Andy, what have you got
I
today?
like it.
Yeah, I'm wearing the Denison. A very hot brand, came about towards the end of 2024 and really took the industry and certainly Instagram by storm. So they sent out the steel aventurine, the ALD, really, really cool little piece, 37mm. You can tell the heritage is case manufacturing because of the price point. I think they nailed the case, and what they're doing with the stone dials as well for such an accessible price point is great. So I'm excited to see what they do next as well with the brand. But yeah, that's what I'm wearing today.
Couple of cool watches there you've got as well, and I think
Thank you.
You've probably got that FOIS. That was the one I'm assuming that was discontinued a couple of years back before they eventually rebirthed it last year.
Yep. It's the one with the 1861 movement in it. So, yeah, it's nice. I like the size on it. 39.7 and the sword hands, and without the crown guards. It just ticked every box for me. Thought about getting the Moonwatch, but then I just thought, I'll stick with this one. This was the one I wanted. So, yeah, and being a Speedmaster fan yourself, that's no small praise there.
No, I think that was the watch that when they discontinued it, folk got a bit of a fright because they thought it would be in the range forever, and suddenly they were caught short of, I can't get one anymore. And then, of course, they've brought it back. The new reissue, personally, I think it's amazing, but I know a few folk are a little perturbed, shall we go, by the colour of the loom.
Yeah,
but
the colour.
Yes.
The colour on the indices. I was out yesterday, and that conversation came up again about the pumpkin indices. Yeah, so talking about you being a Speedmaster fan, and what I mentioned at the top of the show in the introduction, you're involved in so many things, I'm sure many more than I'd mentioned, but no one really knows much about yourself, Dave. So tell us how you got into watches, how you got into the watch industry, and how I mean, Scottish Watches is a phenomenon. It's a huge podcast. It's probably the most popular one I know. How did you get into this wave of industry ascension?
Okay, so long story short, because it could take a while if I start rabbiting on, and I'm known for it, so feel free to interject and tell me to shut up at any point. But yeah, basically, in terms of watches, I'm of that generation, I guess, that grew up wearing a watch. You know, I was pre-mobile phones, cell phones, whatever you want to call them. I think I got my first cell phone. I was probably at the top end of high school, and it was like a really basic thing at that point in time. I always wore a watch. Of course, as a kid, I was a kid of the Swatch era. You know, it came out in 1983. So what was I at that point in time? Kind of just get into my double-digit ages. And
you don't have to tell us.
Was a thing. No, it's fine. But, you know, it's like Swatch Watch was my era, absolutely. And I used to kind of cover over things like the Timexes and the Casios that were in the Argos catalogue. You know, I used to flick through it, and, you know, being a teenage boy, you were only interested in two sections of that. One was the kind of toys and technology, and the other we'll not talk about in this podcast. But, you know, we used to look through those. So I always wore a watch. And my dad's sister, she'd gone out and about travelling when she was young, and she'd got to Switzerland and never came back. So she'd stayed over there, got married, settled down. My cousins were Swiss, so we used to go to Zurich or somewhere in Switzerland for holidays during the summer break at school and such like. And again, you know, it's Switzerland, so chocolate, cuckoo clocks, watches, Switzerland, isn't it? You know, so you kind of got indoctrinated. Not that any of them worked in the watch industry, but when you go to Switzerland, they kind of bash you around the head with those kind of topics. So for sure, that reinforced it, if anything. And then that was really it. It was no more than I liked watches. I grew up wearing them, so hence I wore them. I kind of fell into the lightly collecting Swatch watches when I was in my teens and into my kind of, I guess, early 20s. Then went off to university because that's what you did, didn't you? You know, if you were remotely clever enough to get into college or university, you went to do it to hopefully get a job at the other side of it. Maybe not quite as many opportunities in wide fields that you get these days, but yeah, that's what you did. So did that. And I can remember at uni, I got a summons for jury citation. And I was like, yeah. And it was a jury citation, everybody. I wasn't actually the person
wasn't in the dock.
I was later in life. Anyway, I was at jury service, and that was around about the time when I'm sure it was Pierce Brosnan. Was it Die Another Day? Was that the wavy dialed Omega Seamaster 300?
GoldenEye.
I think that was it. GoldenEye.
Yeah.
GoldenEye, that's the one, yeah. And I can remember where was it Sheriff Court? Sheriff Court, High Court, can't remember. Down by the river anyway, and I can remember end of each day trudging home because I lived up the west end of Glasgow, trudged up the road, and I used to go past I think at the time it was a Mappin and Webb, and they had this big cardboard cutout of James Bond in the window, and of course they had these watches, and it was after they were shut at 5:30, 6, and I kind of sat and looked in the window like a sad loner going, oh, that's pretty cool, I quite like that. Did this for, I think, the best part of a week, and I can remember that fateful day, little sticker stroke cardboard pop up in the window, and it said interest-free credit. And I was like, oh, I'm a poor student. I don't have that kind of money. And I can't remember exactly, but from memory, was it $2,000? Was it just under $2,000? I really genuinely, I'll need to dig out the receipt because I do have it somewhere. In that
it was $2,000. It was $2,000 because I remember You know what? This is making me smile just hearing someone with how well you've done in the industry and what you do now. Started off pretty much the same way I did, and I just think I didn't buy that watch. I was going to, but yeah, it was over $2,000. I remember that.
Yeah, and I can remember then I saw it. I was like, oh, and I kind of went in, and that was the days when, let's just say, the checks and balances were not quite as strict as they are nowadays, and they were like, yeah, you're a student. Don't worry. You mean you don't have a job? Don't worry about it, sir. We can get you this watch to leave you today. And it was the days, of course, where you had to fill in that huge doctrine of paper. It wasn't like a computer or an iPad and fine. And I had to go through the back and phone through to a guy sitting somewhere else telling me whether I could or couldn't have this watch. But I do remember the debate. Do you want the mechanical one or do you want the quartz one? And on that day, I was used to Swatch watches, so it was battery watches, wasn't it? And I was like, well, looks like a lot less hassle, doesn't it? So yeah, I'll have the quartz one. And that was the one I bought. I still have that watch to this day. It followed me everywhere for years. It did all sorts of weird and wonderful things. It wasn't kept as a precious object. It was something I wore. I still enjoy it to this day. It's that old that they don't actually make that size of battery anymore. If you have one of those watches, Omega fit like a little battery adapter into them now to fit the current battery sizes, etc., etc. So that was my first proper watch. But it was nothing more than I wore watches, I liked watches, and I thought, I want a nice watch in my life, and that was it. Then fast forward a few years, kind of graduated, went and did some work stuff, life, etc., etc. And I worked most of my professional life in the cycling industry, nothing to do with watches whatsoever. It was in kind of cycling, whether it was mountain bike road. I was lucky to spend a lot of time with Shimano, got to go to Olympic Games, Commonwealth Games, World Championships, all sorts of stuff. I mean, probably one of my big loves in life has been cycling. But then it got to a stage that suddenly watches started to filter about. I guess being about sporting events, you see all the brands, whether it's, especially within cycling, it would be Tissot quite often. And, you would see Omega at the Olympics and you would see all of these kind of brands floating around. And I started to kind of sniff about, I guess, and get more into it. And then, of course, many folk listening to this will have done themselves, fell deeply into that rabbit hole of doom, which ended up kind of dragging me slowly but discernibly towards bankruptcy at every stage, because every penny you had, you're like, oh, I know what I'll do. I could buy sensible things or do sensible things, or I'll buy a watch. And it kind of just really developed from there. And then the RedBar thing popped up one day. I remember kind of hearing about this community and I thought, that sounds pretty cool. And this was in the super early days where realistically there was New York, there was London just kind of getting up and going, and there was maybe a handful of others kicking about. That was really the early days. I started going along to this and thought, yeah, pretty cool, love it.
You were living in London then, were you? You were living in London?
I was in London. Yeah, I was in London a huge amount of the time because the main kind of office of the building or the company I worked for was down in that neck of the woods. So I was there. It was a good way to... London can be a pretty lonely city if you don't have family and stuff there. And I just thought, it's a bunch of people that probably aren't idiots and might have a bit of a conversation in them and I can talk about watches. Turns out there's a lot of watch idiots out there as well, I have to say, but it was good. Met some people that are to this day still lifelong friends that are cool people, and weirdly, most of what we talk about is not watches, but yeah, that goes to tell you something, I guess. But yeah, really get into watches from there. And then, of course, started to get to know RedBar more, got more involved with it. I kind of built and expanded it out through the UK. We went from only having London to now, I think, I've never actually totted it up in my head number-wise, but there's Glasgow, Edinburgh, Newcastle, Leeds, Manchester, there's London, South East, Cambridge, Oxford, Solent, Bristol, and we're going to look at something in the kind of Midlands coming on board, and there's a couple of others. So, we've spread out over the UK now, so that's been pretty cool to see. It's not me. I've kind of just facilitated people in certain areas that have said, hey, I'd love to do this. What do I do? I spend a couple of days talking to them and giving them an idea and some suggestions, and it's them that pick up the baton and run with it. So all of the chapters out there through the UK are down to those people, not me. I just give them a bit of a help and a bit of guide here and there, but they're the ones that make it actually happen. So that has been really nice to see. And of course, globally, RedBar's turned into a huge thing. I think there's circa 80, 85, 90 chapters and groups around the world now. And as Kathleen likes to say, we're on every continent on Earth except, I think, Antarctica. But to be fair, I don't think the penguins are so into watches.
You never know. Alaska projects, we'll be wearing those. You never know.
For sure. So I just kind of got more ingrained into watches, and the podcast, the Scottish Watches podcast, that came about by virtue of a RedBar in Glasgow, and that's my home city. I set that one up because when I came home, it meant I could go and talk nonsense with people up here about watches, and bumped into, in the early days, it was Rikki, who's obviously still in the podcast, and Rick back in the day. They had this formative idea about, let's do a podcast and talk nonsense about watches. It was nothing more than that in the early days. It kind of changed format a few times, changed faces and personality a little bit over the years, or certainly over that first couple of years. And then by virtue of happenstance, really, I ended up more involved. Initially, I wasn't going to be a voice of the podcast. I was giving them a help in the background, making some intros to people that I'd got to know in the industry, talking to some folk, trying to cajole them to come on as guests. And then Rick had to step aside due to a variety of personal and work-related reasons. He just didn't have the time for it. That was fine. And I stepped in what initially was meant to be temporarily. And Bob's your uncle, God knows how many years and episodes later, I'm still talking nonsense about watches. So that's the podcast part of it. And the Horage part of it, I kind of had the lucky position during COVID that I was still working during COVID, because one of the few industries that still operated was cycling. I kind of came to realisation, I thought, I've done this for a very, very long time, like a very long time. I thought, can't I step back? Can I go and do something else? Do I need to just keep kind of running the whip on my back to see where I get to? And it turns out that yes, I could. So I took that opportunity and have done a couple of little projects and things myself since then. But I got tempted back into the fold. We'd got to know the guys at Horage many years before, and I knew a few of them anyway from the cycling industry, because Andy, who's the co-CEO of that business, his background is cycling as well. And I got dragged back in because my background is a bit of organisational. I'm quite good that way, and they needed some organising, shall we say. I got dragged back in, and now a few years into that, that's where we're at with that. So that's I guess a potted history of me talking a lot about what I've been up to.
Wow, a 20-minute brief summary.
I told you, I warned you I talk a lot. I told you to interrupt. It's on you, not me. That's a you problem.
No, I thought I was listening to one of your podcasts there. I was like, hang on, where's the volume?
Turn it off. Where we were.
Off.
No, off. No.
Oh, brilliant. It raises a few questions. I did want to get into Horage, of course, but just before getting into that initial question, how did it feel when, because I'm trying to visualize this for what we do as well, but going from just doing it as a laugh, right? A bit of fun doing Scottish watches in the early days. Mm-hmm. How does it feel like getting to where you are today? When did you realize that, hang on a minute, you've kind of made it in the industry? Or does that ever click, or how did that feel?
How does it feel? I mean, imposter syndrome sometimes definitely creeps into it. Oh, really? As you mentioned, it was done for fun. Yeah, for no other reason. Yes, I knew quite a lot of people within the industry because with RedBar, you're organising events, and frankly, brands reach out to RedBar because there's a group of people that want to spend money in watches, and they're not stupid, these people. You know, they think, let's engage with these guys because that's our audience. Fair play. So I got to know, depending on the size of the brand, but I got to know, country managers, country directors, CEOs of brands, and from going to different events over the years, got to just know a network of people. And I do believe that people are just people at the end of the day. I'm not a big person that goes on titles, to be honest with you. It's more about what can you do and how you deal with and treat with people that are more important to me. So I met some interesting people, both at the good end and the bad end of that spectrum, shall we say, a bit like everything else in life. And when the podcast got going, it was the guys wanted to do it just to have a laugh, talk about watches, see what happened. There was no commercial aspect to it. There was no grand plan to take over the world. There was nothing of that ilk. It was just, let's see what happens and see you do something fun. It kind of caught on, I guess, because we didn't take it too seriously. I think if you set up a podcast or a magazine or whatever to be serious and commercial within the watch sphere, there's lots of preconceptions about what you have to do. You have to be super careful about what you do and don't say. You can't be seen as being negative. You have to pander to people's egos at the end of the day, I guess, and you have to kind of it's a small industry, so you've got to be careful for fear of being kind of ousted. But we didn't really have that overlord because, well, it was just for fun. And I didn't work in the industry, neither did Rikki, neither did Rick. There was no agenda there, and we just kind of fired from the hip, bit cheeky here and there, never meaningfully trying to target anyone or have a go at anyone, but if we didn't like it, we said we didn't like it. If we wanted to have a go at it, we could have. If we loved it, we could praise it. It is what it was. But then it seemed to catch a vibe. I mean, of course, people started listening to it, and as the audience built, we started to get folks saying, oh, could you do this? Could you do that? Could you maybe see if you can speak to this person? And of course, a lot of brands initially were very kind of hesitant because podcasting as a general thing was still quite small when we started. It hadn't really caught fire like it has today, where you can listen to a podcast on God only knows what topic if you want to find it. It's out there now. 5-6 years ago, they weren't there. And the brands were magazine adverts. They were very wary of YouTube. They were very wary of podcasts. They were very wary of Instagram. And then, obviously, of course, the cough years, as Rikki likes to call them, the COVID years came along and everything got shut down. All the traditional means and access to the market kind of almost vanished overnight. And we can remember some of the biggest brands in the world suddenly scrambling to get onto Instagram and work out how lives worked and maybe not doing it particularly well for a few months, etc., etc. So suddenly they kind of reached out and said, you might be a way we can talk to people. And it suddenly became easier to convince them to come on because they were willing to try something different that in the past had always been kind of verboten, don't do it. And they did it. And they thought, actually, this works. And then that was the point where we had this realization, well, we've got something on our hands here. Now, I was doing other stuff and I was like, I don't want to do this full time. I don't want to make this my full-time job. Rikki had always worked more as a freelance basis in a bit of photography, a bit of video work, a bit of editing work, just in that kind of media landscape. And he'd done some work with magazines. And he kind of thought, I'm going to dedicate a proportion of time to see what we can do with this. And I kind of said, hey, we should also be wary here. Like these big brands have an agenda. Let's be straight. The big brand's agenda is sell watches. There's absolutely nothing wrong with their agenda, but that is their agenda. And I thought, we need to be careful about just giving away effectively this narrative. Because A, it's not fair in all the other professionals out there that are trying to make a living from doing it. And B, we don't want to get used by the greater industry just to put content out for them on our dime effectively. So we started saying, right, look, one show a week has always just been us talking nonsense about watches. Do we do 2 shows a week? So we started to try this. And then the narrative really become one show a week is very much us talking watches, no agenda. We talk about what we want to talk about. That's it. Nothing. It's completely non-commercialized. It's just us doing it. And then another one a week. It could be one of 3 things. It could be us just interviewing somebody that we think super interesting. Like a Periscope, for example, or the wife of Geraldine Genta. Someone that's super interesting has got a narrative. It's not commercial, but it's Evelyn, sorry. Geraldine's the daughter.
All right.
Geraldine's the daughter? Yeah, Geraldine's the daughter.
I know it's Evelyn.
Evelyn's the wife. Evelyn's the wife, you're right. Evelyn's the wife, Geraldine's the daughter. We had both of them on the show. And again, that was because it was someone interesting that we had luckily been given access to. We had David Coulthard on. Again, that was because we know someone at IWC who went, do you fancy speaking to David? Well, of course we'll speak to David Coulthard. That's pretty cool. And then when brands came along and said, we want to come on and talk about specific product, then it was like, well, okay. And we started to say, right, let's see what we can do there. And we think we've got a nice balance personally. It brings in enough revenue that covers the costs. I mean, you guys do a podcast. We were talking before we started recording. Microphones, laptops, recording equipment.
Expensive.
All the paraphernalia. And if you want to, it is expensive, and you need to okay, you get sucked into the vortex of buying new stuff every other week, but that's part and parcel of it. But I always said from the start, people will listen to a badly written song well performed, but they will not listen to a really good song badly sung. Yeah. And, podcasts are about something that's nice in your ear holes. And, you do need to invest in the good kit.
You did say ear holes.
Good product. Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends, There's probably a podcast for that out there. Just get onto the internet, you'll find it. But I think for me, the other thing as well is you have to do a good job at it. And it takes time as well. And, when folk like yourself and, there's a multitude of other people out there put out really good quality content, whether it's on YouTube or whether it's on podcast-only streaming platforms, whatever it may be, aside from the investment in kit, it's investment in time. That's maybe time not doing something else they can earn money. It's time that could be with their family. It's time that they could be lying on the couch naked watching something on Netflix. It's any of these things. And I think people deserve to at least make something or cut even on it. It's not about profiteering, but I think if that comes into the narrative to an extent, it reinforces it and it makes the product better and it means it lasts longer and it means you get better content, and people don't want to pay for content as a general rule. The audience out there get pretty tied in knots when you try and charge for an article or a magazine or a website or a podcast or YouTube. They don't like paying for stuff, and that's just the world we live in now. I'm not going to debate the rights and wrongs of that, but at the end of the day, if you want to put content out, it costs money. You either have got deep pockets and you pay for it yourself, or someone's paying somewhere.
Yeah, that was very well said. We're certainly in the phase of just digging into our own pockets at the moment. But it's sacrifice, right?
Deeper and deeper.
Yeah,
it's a good old Yorkshire phrase, isn't it? It's like you need to what is it? You need to spend, you need to invest. What's it? You need to invest, accumulate, or whatever the hell it is. I can't even remember now. But you need to. Oh, you need to
accumulate.
Yeah. That's the one. That's what I was looking for. You've.
They're from Yorkshire.
I mean, Yorkshire like money, don't they? I mean,
not spending it. Yeah, like Andy.
They've definitely got brass in pocket. But you're right though. But I think like Scottish watches, like yourself, like I know. There's Sam over in America, British Sam in America, that does his thing. You have to love to do it and you have to want to do it. And some of that cost is that it's your time. But, if you want to build a good product that people enjoy, yeah, you have to do that. But at some point it has to make sense, because how many good products like that have we seen over the years that just disappear into thin air? And no matter how well we do, we still get flack. There's folk who love to take everyone down a peg or two, and sometimes we deserve it and sometimes we don't, but that all takes a toll. And if you suddenly think, hang on, this is all on me and I'm just getting flack, what's the point? People drop out and the space gets less interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to enjoy it. Otherwise, just a waste of time, yeah. People can tell as well.
Yeah, it has to be the passion, right? And I think that's what we all have in common. It's the actual love of watches is what keeps us going, I think.
Yeah, and for me as well, it's the love of people. Yeah. Oh yeah, and talking. But it's about the love of people for me as well. Like I love folks' reactions, to, I guess we got, as usual with me, I ended up taking the long way around to the answer. I like the people. It's like, I feel really awkward when folk come up and go, I love your podcast. It's like it's not that spectacular at the end of the day, but thanks very, I really am appreciative when folk come up to me, but I feel really weird about it as well, because it's like,
you're always mobbed every time I see you. It's so difficult to actually talk to Dave. If you ever meet Dave in real life, he's always mobbed by people.
Yeah, good luck.
I mean, to get him on the podcast, we actually had to shout over 3 people, Dave, do you want to come on the podcast? He went, yep. And that was it. That's how mobbed he gets.
Yeah, I mean, I find that personally, I find that mentality, is weird the right word, or just, I find it a little bit alien to me. I've never been someone, I can appreciate things for sure, and I can absolutely appreciate people, but a kind of adulation of people that, haven't necessarily done anything that's groundbreaking or life-changing. As usual in life, the people that should get the adulation are the unsung heroes of this world. But folk that come up and say, hey, love the podcast, thanks, blah, 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 great, no problem. But you occasionally get someone that sticks to you like super glue, and it's a bit weird. It's definitely a bit like...
What's the weirdest thing then? Can you tell us the weirdest thing?
Probably you.
Weird things.
Probably me.
Yeah,
You want to
actually,
come on the podcast?
I can remember. I can remember you showing me your affections while slightly drunk at a certain show in London, asking me if I wanted to come on the podcast. I do remember that bit. Oh, what else? Oh, I've had someone come up and say to me, "Oh, like love the podcast and everything." And I thought, great, thank you very much, brilliant. Talked to him for a few minutes, and actually I was literally en route at a show from where I was, basically to go to the bathroom. And or for anyone in America listens, the toilet, because I know when we say bathroom, they're like, there's no bath in it, but it's the bathroom. Anyway, going to the bathroom, and he said, okay, great. And then I went to the bathroom, came out, and he was standing at the door waiting for me.
Oh.
And it was literally like, for the rest of that day, it was like having like a limpet mine attached to my hull.
Was this on the inside, inside of the door or the outside of the...
You know when you get the airlock, the double door type thing. No comment. I was paid for in full, Your Honour. Yeah, I mean,
that's strange.
I don't want to sound like I don't appreciate it, because I do. I just find it quite strange, because I'm like, you have nothing to thank me for. I thank you for listening. This is the most important thing,
That's quite bizarre. Hopefully we never get to that level.
I don't know.
We'll stay a few pegs below.
Don't you worry. Next show I'll be limpet mining you. Don't you worry, Andy. I'll be attached to you.
Dave will be in the cubicle next show.
This is my ambition for this year.
Gosh, I'm going to try and bring it a bit more. How do you bring it more serious now after that?
Horage. You want to talk about Horage, don't you?
Yeah, I want to talk. Yeah, I want to get into Horage. Yeah, and let's just do it in the way of, for any listeners out there to our podcast who maybe aren't so familiar with the brand. What are they about? What's the value proposition really of Horage, and what makes them different from anything else out there?
Okay, so Horage are a Swiss company. We're based in Biel-Bienne, in the centre-ish of Switzerland. Biel-Bienne, for anyone that doesn't know, is regarded as the home of industrial watchmaking. So, you've got Omega there, you've got Rolex's main movement manufacturer there, Arm & Stromer there, Swatch Watcher there. Pretty much everyone you can imagine is in or about Biel. And Horage started off, Tuya, who's the boss, she is the owner, she's the chief boss, and she started a business in Biel, in the watch industry, many, many years ago, predominantly working in the supply chain side of things. So more so back in the day, cases, bracelets, clasps, straps, hands, dials, all of these things, they were usually sourced by brands from somewhere else, another producer in Switzerland or somewhere else in the world. And Tuyu's originally from Taiwan. She was educated in Berlin. She studied kind of marketing and general concepts around brand marketing and brand management. And she didn't know anything about watches. She saw some watch stuff, got intrigued by it, went to Switzerland to do a kind of period of time in the industry to see if she liked it, decided she liked it, decided that she had a good business idea, and set up a business doing exactly that. So she helped them to source a lot of these components that were effectively non-movement components. Switzerland is very good at making all that stuff, but Switzerland's also very expensive, and they really focus their attention on the expensive stuff that they can do that is not done as well elsewhere, typically movement components and parts. But cases, bracelets, dials, hands, Germany, South Korea, Asia, there's a huge supply chain that can make them every bit as well as the Swiss make them, but at a fraction of the cost. And therefore, that was what she started off in the industry doing. She also realised, though, that over time, a lot of the brands would kind of come together, organise, become more integrated, and start to source that stuff for themselves, like it happens in any industry out there. So she also started to build the idea of having her own brand. She knew how to build a watch for all intents and purposes. The only thing she didn't have was a movement, but she definitely knew where she could get them from because she was supplying all of the industry that had movements. So about 16 years ago this year, in fact, they decided to push a brand to the market, that being Horage. And they initially were nothing more than a lot of other brands. It was a nicely designed watch with a little bit of her own personality and DNA in it, using a collection of components sourced from the Swiss watch industry. And she then realised quite quickly, I have no point of difference. I've got no USP. I'm another goldfish in a big goldfish tank of watches. I need to do something different. And that's when she started to try and work out, what am I going to do that's different? She wanted to look at maybe doing something more premium. In the early days of the more premium end of the independent sector that was kind of beginning to birth at that time. You know, a lot of these independent brands are not as old as you think they are. And then she kind of then came around eventually to, we do our own movement. And what she's very good at is she got together a group of people that knew what they were doing, had the skill sets and the education and the abilities to do what she wanted to do, which was create a new movement. Because she said, at the end of the day, that is the soul, the essence, the heart of a mechanical watch. And that is the point of difference. The point of difference is if you've got something that's yours and you've done it, you're already significantly ahead of the majority of brands out there. And that's really how that came about. And then that resulted in her investing a lot of her own money over a 6-7 year period. I mean, we're talking 6 to 8 million francs of her own money was invested into the development of that K1 movement, to bring that K1 movement to life, looking at lots of things to future-proof it. Silicon at that point was super tied up in patents and trademarks and all sorts of things. But she knew she could do the research, but she couldn't necessarily retail it. But she designed silicon's ability to be used within her movements from day one. So she was very forward-thinking in ways of doing this, so that her money wasn't just going to waste effectively. K1 launched. The very first watches actually were launched in, of all places, of the very early days of Kickstarter. And in those times, it was only in the US and in the UK. It wasn't allowed in Europe at that point. And it was launched via Kickstarter in the UK. And that was the Jonas K1, named after the K1 movement, and also Jonas Nidegger, who was the kind of lead engineer that she'd hired to bring this project to life. And then really after that, it began to build and develop. So the K1 movement powered a range of models. Then they started to work on the K2, which was the micro rotor movement, taking a lot of learnings from that K1 project. And also you had the tourbillon, which started to come in. Now, that was a bit later, obviously. The tourbillon's actually 5 years old this year. And that was something that had been in the works for a few years before that. And it was meant to have been initially a collaborative effort. It was before that meant to have been a collaborative effort between ourselves and a couple of more established premium caliber makers in Switzerland. Obviously, you had La Juperie and you had Vaucher Manufacture. That was in the days before Hermès had a stake in Vaucher Manufacture, and before Citizen obviously had the controlling stake within La Juperie. They never came to anything because ultimately Citizen came into La Juperie and that paid to that, and Hermès came into Vaucher Manufacture and that paid to that. And basically they had a discussion. Her and Andy said, we'll do it ourselves then. And then COVID started, as if to kick us square in the you-know-whats. That started, but they took that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, let's do it. Let's just focus on it and do it. And that resulted and culminated in the KTOU, the hand-wind flying tourbillon caliber, coming to life. And of course, that led...
Sorry, just on the tourbillon,
Sure.
I know that's maybe not your favourite complication. What's your view on it now, having been behind the process of designing it and implementing it and dropping it?
I have to say, it's not the actual complication part that's not my favourite. It's the aesthetic part. I'm, as a general rule, not a fan of watches with holes in the dial, whether it's open heart, whether it's opened for the tourbillon cage, whether it's heavily skeletonized watches. As a general rule, they're not really my aesthetic. I'm much into a cleaner, simpler watch. That's really just my vibe, to be honest with you. I've grown to really appreciate in terms of what tourbillons are, not the nuanced story of pocket watches and gravity and all that, but actually the difficulties in terms of engineering and building them are, pretty considerable. And there's a good reason that a lot of people don't do them, because they are not the simplest things in the world. That said, they're not the hardest, but they're definitely not the easiest. And I've grown to appreciate that for sure. I really appreciate the noise they make. They make one of the best kind of mechanical watch noises, because you've obviously got the kind of tic-tac of the watch, but you've also got the kind of noise of the carriage and the kind of tourbillon cage rotating as well. That in itself is really cool. So as I say, I guess I've learned to appreciate things more. But at the end of the day, as a company, we're very open and transparent. Not everyone loves everything and not everyone likes everything. And, I've got favourites within the range that we produce, and I've got ones that I wouldn't buy if it was my money. There's others I would definitely buy, but then it would be a boring world if you loved everything or hated everything, wouldn't it?
Yeah, if everyone loved and hated the same things, it'd be even more boring. What Horage do at an amazing price point, again, is like just crazy things that, it's like you're having a lot of fun there.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we've got, internally we use this phrase, it kind of sounds a bit tacky and a bit cheesy, but it's kind of like affordable horology. And let's get it straight, our watches are not cheap or inexpensive. A tourbillon starts at 10,000 Swiss francs. That's a serious amount of chump change. It's more than the vast majority of people will ever spend on a watch in their lifetime. And many people will buy many, many watches in their lifetime and they still won't add up to 10,000. So let's get it straight that we're not pretending to be super accessible. But for a tourbillon, a Swiss-made flying tourbillon with an in-house movement, we are definitely super accessible compared to their peers. And we really believe that we should be able to deliver the absolute best value we can while still deriving a fair profit for the business that allows the business to invest in the future, invest in people, and create a good number of jobs for a good number of people. We're a 30-strong company. We're not like 5 people. There is 30 of us that have a livelihood that depends on us doing business. And of course, that means that we need to make some profit in it. But we try to be very transparent on that as well and tell people, okay, look, here's the real cost of things and here's what it cost of doing business is. And that does lead a lot of people to think, that's excellent value for what you're getting. At the moment, we operate broadly in the 5,000 to 15,000 Swiss franc category. And yes, 5,000, even 5,000 is a huge amount of money for a watch. But we typically say, well, for 5,000 from us, you can get a full in-house, full silicon, 72-hour power, cost certified micro rotor movement in a really nice watch with nice materials. I'll say nice design, but obviously the aesthetic is down to the individual to decide whether they like the watch or not. I think we make very contemporary sizes. We're operating in the 37mm to 40mm category. So I think for this, that makes us very universal in terms of who can wear them. And, I always think we try just to deliver the best value, most technically advanced, most openly discussed product we can within the watch sphere. And we think, as a general rule, the industry is a little bit too closed door, and we would rather it was more open. And we can't tell other people to open their doors, but we can open ours. We can let people peek behind the doors, and we're not materially different to 99% of watch brands. We all have to do stuff the same way. So we think if we open our doors and let people see what we do, you'll have a pretty good idea of what everyone does, to be honest with you.
It's interesting you mentioned doors there as well, tying into our previous conversation. But but how is Horage doing in terms of uptake and sales and popularity and increase in visibility?
Well, it's funny because you say that. We are proactively now, when I say proactively, it's because we've never actively done it in the past, is trying to market a little bit more. We're an engineering company. Fundamentally, that's what we do. We engineer products. We talk a little bit about them, and enough people thank you very much, everyone. And touching wood, enough people have engaged with it and purchased something over the last decade plus, in fact, that have kept us going. And we've got to a nice kind of volume of sales. We're not trying to be the next Rolex, for want of a better phrase. We're not interested in making 1 million watches. If it happens, it happens. It'll not happen. But if it happens, it'll happen. But we know we've got a number that's a really comfortable break-even point for us. And when we get to that point and we're producing watches and selling that volume of watches based on the model we have, we're in a very comfy position. And we have steadily but surely been growing towards that for the last 3, 4, 5 years. And we're not that far away from it now. And we probably within the next, I would say 12 to 24 months, get to that number. And that moves us into a new space. That moves us into a space where we know we are selling enough watches every year that we pay all the bills, we pay all the wages, we can have enough money to put back into development. And we're not thinking, right, okay, well, we need to pay that, which means we can't put as much here, we can't put as much there. That will get us to the point where we can put the money we want to put in all the areas we want to put it. So we spent a lot of time in the last 5 years doing such like hand wind tourbillon, the K2 micro rotor. And of course, we also introduced the micro rotor tourbillon. And there's another caliber that will be launching in March, April time. That work's all been done, but that's when it will be announced. And then we transition to a period where we put a little bit more effort into just building a little bit more volume of sales to get us into that comfort position, because we have 2 big caliber projects that we really want to work on. One of them is a caliber style or type, shall I say, that makes engineering a tourbillon look pretty simple. And that will take a long time and a lot of money. We know we operate fast, but even this one, most of the industry would tell you it would take them at least 10 years. We think it will take us between 3 and 5 years to do it. So still a lot faster than the industry norms, but it's still 3 to 5 years of investment in something that you can't sell until it's ready. So that's something we really want to do. And we want to also look at our hand wind tourbillon, which, is a 120-hour full silicon hand wind titanium flying tourbillon caliber. But we want to do a couple of things to it, because the industry has a habit. When you've set a bar, they will aim at that bar. And they're a while away yet, but they're getting there. There's a few folk beginning to make moves towards it. But we want to kind of then throw that baton another couple of football pitches ahead of where we are now, so that when they've caught up, we're already ahead of the pitch in terms of that stuff. So that takes money though, and that is something that we have to be cognizant of. We can't just throw money at the wall and hope it sticks. The next year or so, you'll see us kind of just build our volumes by another high hundreds. We're not talking, we don't need thousands more watches. We need, in the high hundreds more to get us to that comfy position that we can then move forward. So you'll see us at more events. You'll see us at more community engagement stuff. We'll be spending a little bit more money doing outreach type stuff compared to what we have done in the past.
I think that's
onwards and up.
I think that's a great introduction to the brand, and the essence I get from Horage is very movement centric. And I think a great example is like the Revolution 3, because it's almost like the whole watch is inside out. Definitely, again, go to the website to check out some of these pieces. We'll also put links to Horage as well, so you can see on the website, but some crazy engineering there. And yeah, it's exciting to see where the brand develops. So yeah, great stuff.
Thank you. I know I need to be careful here, because this is not work. I'm not at work, David, so don't just open your mouth and splash things out. But there are some genuinely, I think the thing we've got coming, the next caliber we've got coming, maybe isn't as kind of gangbusters headliney as a tourbillon or the micro rotor. It's much more normal, shall we say? But normal is also good, because I think we've felt for a while that within that realistic normal sphere of watches. So for me, mechanical watch wise, I'm talking the 1500 to 2000 through to 3000 to 4000 type category. The sub 5000 premium watch So just, I guess the industry would categorize it as sub-luxury. So it's in that kind of premium category. There's a lot of lovely watches out there. There's some beautifully designed watches. There's some beautifully put together watches. They've been very reliant on Sellita for a long time. You've got La Jouperet bringing the G100 caliber in, which is definitely helping as well, for sure. But we feel that there's room in there for something that is pretty punchy-wise in terms of specs. It's maybe not the sexiest looking movement in the world. It's maybe not the one that's going to set the world on fire, but it could really kind of democratize that category in terms of specifications.
Well, so look out for that release then. So sounds like a very interesting one.
I think it'll get a few furrowed brows in some companies and a few raised eyebrows in others. So yeah, it should be good.
Awesome. My next question, I guess, is your favorite brand. So you're big on Omega. Would I be right in saying that you're quite an Omega fanboy?
I think it would be fair to say that I own more Omega watches than any other brand, and I have done for quite a while. I am a fan of Omega as a brand.
Okay, so apart from the James Bond link, tell us a bit about that, because like we mentioned, Sam, Casual Watch Reviews on YouTube. Check out his
Absolutely.
YouTube channel, and Dave's a regular panelist on his live stream. So we do hear you wax lyrical about Omega and what they do. Tell us what you think of the company, where it's going. Multiple releases. They're sticking with the same line of watches, but they're trying to expand them into different areas, different sizes, different identities of the same, like the Speedmaster, the Seamaster. And tell me how you think it's going at Omega, and is anything you'd be slightly critical of?
For me, the thing I like most, I guess, about Omega is they make products that I aesthetically like. At the end of the day, when we're buying consumer products, if you don't like them, don't buy them. Simple as that. So aesthetically, I've always been drawn to them. I mean, at the end of the day, ultimately, the first, not mechanical, but nice luxury watch I bought was that Seamaster. I've always been drawn more to tool watch orientated products than not. I'm not really a dress watch person per se. I've got a couple of them that I kind of begrudgingly have to wear if I'm getting dressed up. But outside that, I'd much rather wear a dive watch, sports chronograph, something of that ilk. That's my vibe. I think on the face of it, yeah, everyone gets sucked in by the kind of consumerism that is the world we live in now, whether it's brand placement, whether it's James Bond with Omega, whether it's the Olympic Games, we all fall for it somehow. We love to think we don't, and I always say the people that protest the most about it are usually the ones that are getting sucked in the most, but I'm kind of in the middle. I get a bit, not for me, or I get pulled in. So with Omega, it was about space. Yeah, the space narrative. And, okay, you can cut through all of the marketing blah-blah-blah, but there is a fundamental truth to the narrative behind the moon watch and everything else. And I'm a big space geek. I love everything from that era and generation. I'm a child of the early 70s. And on that basis, that was kind of coming into the absolute peak heyday of the Apollo program, and obviously moving into the shuttle program after that. And for sure, I love all that stuff. So there was a kind of harmony there, if you want to put it like that, between those watches. I love chronographs, especially manual wind ones where you can kind of look through the case back and see it all happening. As someone that likes technical things, that appealed to me as well. And the more you get to know about watches, and I guess the more cynical you become as well about how consumerism works and the high street works, you learn there's a lot of product out there that's a lot of smoke and a lot of mirrors and not a lot of substance. And I think of all of the big high street commercial watch brands, Rolex for sure are also in this category, but for sure Omega are there. They actually do some innovation. They do some genuine developmental work. They have taken some risks, whether it's the coaxial from Daniels that they integrated into, over the years they have done things that a lot of other brands wouldn't do because they wouldn't want to take the risk. So they've for sure, I think, done some stuff. Is there some just pure marketing BS? Of course there is. They went through a phase of over-egging the limited edition, so much so that they've effectively come out and said, we're no longer doing limited editions. We might do some limited production product, or some product might not be as available as others because we can only make so many watches a year and we might not make enough of something compared to what the demand is. but no longer is there only 1,000 of them or X number of them. So I think they've maybe learnt a little bit of a lesson from that as well. Is their range too big? Absolutely. They've got way too many products in their range. Is it?
Yeah, so what do you think of the dark side of the moon, the grey side of the moon, the light side of the moon? I mean, do they need that many? I know people do buy them. I don't know how many people buy how many of them. It's just, they're nice to look at, but to really have in your catalogue, is it? I mean, it's
yeah, I mean, I'd love to do a proper root up analysis of what actually does and doesn't sell. I think this is somewhere that you are seeing a few brands paying the price now, in that the classic retail model is fundamentally broken as far as I'm concerned. And it's not just watches, to be honest with you. Back in the day, you had a more harmonious relationship. You had the retailers and you had the suppliers of product, and they were kind of on equal terms. I'm talking a long time ago. And they kind of talked to each other, decided what they were putting in the shop or buying or not buying, and that was the done deal. Then you got the kind of rise of retailers, and you've got, in some cases, retailers in some spheres that are infinitely more powerful than the brands. Think of the supermarkets in the UK, for example. You know, they tell the food producers what to make and how to make it and what they'll pay for it and da-da-da-da-da. And you've also had the rise in some cases of brands, and in the luxury sphere especially, the brands are, in a general rule, infinitely more powerful than the retailers, outside of a handful of big multinational retailers like your Watches of Switzerland Group or your Bucheras or these kind of companies. But even those guys aren't generally as big as folk like LVMH. He doesn't vie for the richest guy in the world by being a small businessman. And I think that leads to imbalance of power, and it leads to a situation that we see now, which is you have retailers being told, you will be buying this, you will be arranging this, and you'll be taking this many of them. And that is led to brands becoming lazy. It means they can produce product that they don't really care whether there's a market for it, because if they're dictating that the retailer has to take it, then they're making a market for it. The problem is they don't control the consumer. And if the consumer doesn't buy them, you've got this poor retailer, but the retailer is the guy stuck in the middle. And if you're not one of the big groups like Watches of Switzerland or Buchera or Vempe, you do what you're told or you lose your dealership. But it's your problem when you've still got that weird and wonderful watch that you were told was the best thing since sliced bread, but it's still sitting on your shelf 5 years later. Who takes the bath in it? The retailer does. Which means that then they do sell it, and that reinforces the brand. Well, I mean, look, you sold it eventually, so we should still keep making them and telling you to take them. Yeah, I think there's too much of that goes on, and these brands really probably need to take a cold, hard look at some of the products in the range and say, why are we making this again? Remind me why we make this. Because I think there is product in 80% plus of the watch brands that just have product in their range that they shouldn't have in their range anymore. I'm all for folk trying weird stuff, don't get me wrong. Tudor PO1, I own one, I bought one, I paid full price for it. People thought I was an idiot. Still a cool watch, love it. Did it sell? Not really. Did a few retailers get stuck with them? For sure. Although they've all gone. I haven't seen a single one in a retailer's window for a long time, which means that they've eventually got rid of them. So as I say, I'm all for folk trying a bit of stupid, a bit of crazy, but you look at the Omega catalogue and you think, I can get lost on the website, try to find things, and I know what I'm looking for. So, I think every brand has got that. I think Rolex, as a general rule, has got a pretty clean range. I think they're pretty...
That's what I was going to say. They've got it right in terms of, what you get, what's in there.
For sure. And I think Tudor, not too bad, not the worst. But I'll be honest,
isn't it? A little bit.
A lot of the Swatch Group brands, in my opinion, some of the brands within the Swatch Group are very heavy catalogue-wise that could do with getting pared down a little bit. I think it would actually do them a world of good if they did as well. I think IWC and some of the Richemont brands, as a general rule, aren't the worst offenders in it. They've got a couple of models too much somewhere, but actually I think they're pretty clean. And I mean, Tag Heuer, that's some range as well. When you can have a massive store. And I get lost. I was like, it's a something glass box, something chronograph.
You almost think they should stop and then start again, because they're doing some really nice things. I think Tag are doing some really nice things now, and they have been for a few years, but this
too
I'll be honest. I think Tag Heuer have done an epically good job of, I wouldn't say turning their fortunes around, because they've not exactly done badly. You know, they've always been one of the better brands from a kind of commercial perspective. But in terms of how they're viewed, for many years, the watch collector got a bit hoity-toity snobby about Tag Heuer. It was like, well, you know, maybe I got one at my 18th or my 21st, but I grew out of that stage and I moved into real watches. And
entry
they've
level.
They've always made some cracking watches, some absolute iconic watches as well. But I think in the last 2-3 years, they've managed to get themselves firmly back into the narrative. And, you know, like the Barbie watch, you know, that pink Carrera.
I love the Barbie watch.
I've seen in the last 6 months, suddenly watch people, and by watch people, I mean people that have Instagram accounts that only post pictures of their watches. I've seen that watch pop up, and even the diamond dot version of it, which they brought out, I've seen a few people pop up with that, and that kind of got me thinking, they're back in the game. Glassbox is back in the game with the kind of the chronograph as well. They've managed to get the Monacos back in the game. So yeah, fair play to them. Yeah. And I think the Formula One tie-up that they've got now will further reinforce that for them.
Yeah, good turnaround, good reinvention, basically.
Absolutely.
Right? I think they're doing fantastic. We just had the LVMH week as well, right? And I think they dropped some belters as well with the Porsche collaboration. I love those. The gold ones,
Formula Ones,
beautiful,
as well.
But it's so expensive, like 24k euros.
Yeah, I mean, I said a bit like the collaborative watches as a general rule. I'm not a big collab fan. Actually, weirdly, it really annoys me when I see a collab. I've no idea who they've collabed with, what the collab's about, but I like the watch. It really irks me. Like Omega did it with the black, was it the black ceramic and turquoise Planet Ocean, I think it was, last year they did. And I think it might have been the New Zealand team of the
All Black.
The New Zealand team sailing watch, not the Round the World, whatever it's called, you know, the
America's Cup.
America's Cup, that one, the New Zealand team America's Cup, black sat. That's an amazingly good looking watch. Spoiled by a case, although I've kind of got past it. At least it's only in the case back. But I was like, oh, that's a good look. Oh, it's a collab. Oh, damn it. And that really annoyed me. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of collabs in general.
Yeah, if you don't have a connection with the brand they've collaborated with, it doesn't feel, why do I want that on the watch?
Yeah, I'm exactly that. Although, you know, put a space rocket on it and you'll probably just get me to buy it. But well actually, there's a certain space brand at the moment. It's probably not the most popular. I wouldn't maybe go with that at this point in time. You know, something about Space Z or something. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe don't go with that just now.
Right. So I do have one question. RedBar London hasn't really been as active as it could be. Is it going to be more active? I mean, being from London, for me, it breaks my heart that Southeast come in, they do a lot of stuff and they do some great stuff. But in London, and that's your patch, that should be where you're doing it.
Well, we can tell you the broad narrative of that. And it's a combination of things coming together. But primarily, it was going great guns up until COVID. Effectively, we had 2 meets a month. And we had a home base. We had a location, which was the Alfred Tennyson pub in Mayfair. It's a kind of oldie worldly pub, 3 floors. First floor is the pub, second floor is a restaurant, third floor was a private event space. We'd built a great relationship with them to the point where they allowed us to use that space at no charge as long as we spent money at the bar. We built a reputation of being able to spend money at the bar, all happy. The venue was safe, it was secure, it was in a nice area, didn't cost us any money, and everyone behaved themselves. Fantastic. Then, of course, COVID came along, and so for the best part of 2 years, there were no in-person meets because we weren't even allowed to see our dying relatives, never mind meet up and talk about watches. Therefore, that was that. Obviously, the landscape of venues, whether it be hospitality venues, we'll broadly call them, pubs, clubs, restaurants, changed materially after COVID. It became a completely different landscape and much for the worse. And, you know, let's not also forget that a huge number of people lost jobs and livelihoods and their businesses through that in that sphere. But the Tennyson was one of them. They actually had 2 or 3 different venues. They closed one completely that never reopened. The other one got scaled back, and the space that we used to use became their office space because they also had to come out of the offices they had to save some money. So that space vanished overnight, that we couldn't use it anymore. And we started reaching out to, for maybe I would say 6 to 9 months after lockdown finished as well, people were being wary about meeting up in person as a general rule. But we started talking to venues. Yep, we would like X £1,000 for you to just book the venue. Well, we don't have X £1,000 to book the venue because RedBar's a not-for-profit, no membership fee set up. And because they didn't have staff, or because, as you know yourself, guys, a lot of venues don't even open some nights of the week now because it's not worth their while. And if they have to open, they have to bring staffing in. So to guarantee the money, you have to pay up front. And we just didn't have that money to do it because that's not how RedBar works. At the same time, we didn't want to start ticketing people and paying money because it goes against the narrative of what RedBar is generally about as well. And when we have tried it in the past, we get a significant amount of pushback. People are very good at saying they would be happy to buy a ticket, not so good when they actually have to buy the ticket, shall I say. So that's another problem. And then you compound that by, unfortunately, and I'm not going to paint London as some kind of desolate crime wasteland, but the general situation has become more challenging in London than it was certainly before COVID in terms of awareness of personal safety, what you do and don't have on you, whether it be mobile phones, nice watches, etc. You have to be on guard, which means in turn that we have to make sure when I do an event, I need to make sure that that event venue is as safe as I can possibly make it without locking everyone up. And that means that we're then restricted to certain areas, certain locations, which further limits the ability to get a venue. Now, we have also found a lot of people in London, of course, during COVID, were working from home and didn't stop working from home necessarily. You had this hybrid model. So that's why Cambridge, Oxford and the Southeast have really been set up and got going, because a lot more people are less central London than they were before. So that kind of comes into the narrative. But to kind of round it out, we've been doing some events with brands where the venues or the brands have a location we can use. And we just did one actually with Christopher Ward in London at a venue. And I know how much we had to pay for that venue, which was not inexpensive, but I used it as a bit of a testing ground. And I'm having a dialogue with them that they understand we're a good bunch. We're pretty easygoing. I'm not going to say where the venue is for security reasons, obviously, but they have kindly said that they're willing to give us a jab at having a regular meetup there, not charging us for the venue, but at the same time, we have to spend at the bar. And the proof is going to be in the pudding, because the email that will go out to the members will say, I know you've been wanting a regular meetup. I've got you one. I've got you a nice venue, got you a secure venue. All the things you look for are there, but you must put your hand in your pocket and buy drinks when you're there. Because if you don't, and we don't spend enough at the bar, we won't be getting invited back. So it'll be handed over to the general membership in order for them to basically prove how much they want this event. And if they want the event, they need to spend 20, 25, 30 quid each on some drinks, which I frankly feel is a pretty cheap night out in London. Not to say that 30 quid's not 30 quid, but if you want a night out in London, good luck usually getting change out of 100 quid, never mind 30. So I would like to think folk would kind of support us on that. But again, time will tell.
Yeah, I was at that event and I would 100% support on that. It was a good event, good venue. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Obviously, we can't say where it is.
Nope, can't. But
comes
the heart of the individual is being shown to you, so we're on the case. As I say, so fingers crossed. And I've said to them, we'll try and do it once a month. It'll either be a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday night, because that's their quieter nights. They'll have a degree of diktat over which night it is, which month, but beggars can't be choosers, so to speak. When you're trying to have a nice, safe venue in London and telling them you don't want to pay for it, you kind of have to sing to their tune.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. There was that Time for a Pint the other night, and they charge.
Absolutely.
And you have to buy your own drinks. Yeah,
and they charge, and that's their model, and it works for them. But as you're well aware, they're much smaller events, and they're great events. I've been to plenty of Time for a Pint, but it's not a RedBar event. They are two different types of event, and that's what makes it interesting, because there's different events out there.
Yeah, and I'm not saying you should charge all them before I get lynched in London.
No.
I'm paying for tickets because of you.
No, exactly. And as I say, it makes it good when it happens, because you've managed to do it. But as I say, fingers crossed this one comes off and we get on it. And we've had a couple of members who have very kindly done some donkey work for us, getting out and speaking to venues. Been made a lot of promises by some venues, and unfortunately none of them, not through no fault of the individuals, but the venues have usually reneged when they've got to push comes to shove. But this one, fingers crossed, hopefully it pulls off.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm sure there'll be many fingers crossed around London.
It's challenging, like I do the RedBar here in Barcelona. Quite lucky with venues. We have a few free ones, but there is cases where it's like, look, if you want this venue, it's the most safest, the most secure. The deal is it might be €12 to get in, but with that you get a couple of drinks. Generally speaking, people are quite happy with that deal we've got there. But yeah, it's challenging. It's always challenging, and security is always the number one concern, I think, with these events.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that I know the hardcore of RedBar London, they attend many of the different RedBar events. They go up to Cambridge, to go to Oxford, to go to the South East and such like. What I don't, and I hope doesn't happen, is that I don't want to do all this to cater for... There is a certain contingent of people that are very quick to say they'll come, and then they're also very good at telling you at the very last second that unfortunately something's come up and they can't come. So as I say, that is just part and parcel of running events, to be honest with you. But if this one doesn't work out, we'll be finding a small venue, and we'll only be catering to the hardcore of folk that have really made the community what it is. And if you're not in that, then unfortunately you may suffer a little bit. But if you support it, it'll succeed, and we'll be able to use this venue. So fingers crossed. And without saying it's their fault and it's over to them, it's their fault and it's over to them.
I'm wondering if we're on that list. I'll come to all of it.
Picking you out of Barcelona as well, even though you've only been to one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm losing all. You've only been to one, yeah. Right. I think that's all we have time for today.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It's always good. Unfortunately, I do talk a lot, so that's probably going to make your editing job.
Well, that's the whole point.
That's the whole point of having a guest.
Well, I guess that's
if
the
you
whole
didn't
point
talk.
of a podcast. Yeah,
exactly.
You've probably been there.
Yeah.
We've been there on Scottish Watches where you get someone you think will be great on, and you're like, and do you want to say anything more than yes and no to this whole interview? You know?
Yeah, that's the awkward, really awkward silences and moments. Yeah, that's well, that didn't happen today, as you can clearly hear.
Correct.
Andy, do you want to lead us out?
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to check out Scottish Watches. Make sure to check out Horage Watches. We'll pop all the links and descriptions everywhere, all over the website and the Instagram. Make sure to check out the website for the show notes over at www.chronopassion7.com. And I'll do the classic sign-off. And that is adios and hasta luego from Barcelona. And I'll speak to you all on the next one.
And as Andy says, farewell from Barcelona in Spain. Dave, is there something you want to say before we sign off?
I will just say goodbye and thank you very much for having me, gentlemen.
So as Dave says goodbye from Glasgow, from London, it's Toodle Pip and laters. And we'll see you, and you'll hear us in the next one.